when we think about what is a manager's responsibility, sure, there's the responsibility that's on paper in terms of your position description, but then there's the beyond the brochure experience of what management really could and should be. Quite honestly, when you correlate the departure of people, attrition, and customers, there is, a direct correlation that when you're losing your best people, you're also losing customers. I recently had a conversation, this is more anecdotal, but I was just talking to a colleague who was working with this company for a number of years. She was the client, she was the customer. And I was asking her for a reference to this company. I said, would you recommend them? And she said no, because lately, every time I try to reach out to them, I'm dealing with a new person. I'm dealing with the person who doesn't understand my account. I'm dealing with someone who I have to re-educate. She said, find some place that's a little bit more stable. As human beings, we look for expectation and stability. That oftentimes is something that human beings resonate with, because if I know what to expect, I actually then know how to engage with you. But if every time I walk into the workplace, it's a whole different environment, and as a customer, if every time I walk into your business, it's a whole different dynamic, I'm most likely not going to truly feel invested. And so really good managers I have found are the ones who do say, this is my responsibility, because losing customers is a part of my, remit, and also keeping good employees.
What is it about a workplace, a company, an employer that makes you feel like you fit in, like the culture is the one for you? For a lot of people, it's down to that T word that we talk about so often in the context of leadership and on this podcast. And that word is trust. Certainly easy to argue that that's where a good culture begins. Obviously, there's a lot more to it, things like psychological safety, key leadership behaviors, and so on and so on. And we'll be talking about all of these things. We'll be exploring what makes a good culture, what some of the red flags are, some of the green flags even, today with my guest, Natalie Holder. Natalie is an employment lawyer who coaches professionals through workplace trauma to reinvention. So whether you do have concerns about job security, you're perhaps fatigued by being passed over or ignored or underestimated at work, all of these things that contribute to feeling like maybe you're not a right fit for this culture, that the culture isn't the one for you, or that the company isn't the one for you, then Natalie helps with these challenges to reveal that unseen path and find your way to a more fulfilling and impactful future. So we'll talk about all of these things, from career journey to management to workplace culture, the role and importance of mentoring, of leadership, of feedback, and much more besides, from honesty to kindness to loyalty, empathy, building relationships, and of course, trust. It's a great conversation. Natalie is a very engaging speaker. She has very clear and well-earned expertise, and we will dig into many of the big issues that are facing the modern workplace today. And do check those show notes or stick around to the end to find out how to learn more about Natalie. Perhaps reach out to her, work with her if it's a good fit, or if anything that we talk about today sounds familiar. And if you are a new leader, you're working in one of these high-tech, rapid-paced, fast-paced, really challenging environments where technology is at the fore, where you are leading specialists and you are perhaps facing challenges like imposter feelings, like not knowing how to build the kind of team culture that everyone wants to work in, then do please also visit my website. It's on the screen right now. It's leadingwithintegrity.co.uk. It's also in the show notes, as is my LinkedIn profile. So do reach out to me if you would like to chat leadership. And do come and join us at the Integrity Leaders online community. It is built for leaders like you who are doing it for the first time or have been through a transitional period, a moment of change in your leadership journey, and you're looking for a supportive peer-to-peer environment where you can also learn the theories and practices of leadership. You can meet and engage with other leaders in similar stages of their careers, as well as those who are maybe a few steps ahead of you, and you can benefit from their experiences too. If you want to learn more about any of that, as I said, visit the website or drop me a message on LinkedIn. And I would love to welcome you aboard the virtual Starship Integrity very soon. It does help to be a sci-fi fan, but it's not mandatory. Okay, well, that's enough from me, at least until I start asking Natalie some questions. So on that note, let's bring Natalie into the virtual room. and I hope you enjoy this conversation.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Natalie, welcome to Leading with Integrity. It's great to have you aboard the show today.
It's a pleasure to be here, David. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to this conversation. I think you're going to have some interesting stories for us, I'm sure. Don't want to prejudge, but I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, definitely.
No pressure, no pressure.
No, none at all. No, never. Well, speaking of no pressure, we're going to push you in at the deep end, which is interesting. So we were just talking about pools, weren't we, before we started recording? But so I'm guessing you're quite a good swimmer. So we'll start us off then. Tell us a bit about your career journey so far, your story, what led you to where you are, what you do, why you do it, etc.
It really has been this, very circuitous journey in where you go to school expecting to be in a profession from day one until retirement. And then you realize along the way that, hey, there are so many other aspects that are not being fulfilled or that could be fulfilled by, taking the unbeaten path. I'm a big believer in, yes, sometimes going off of the paved road and just off-roading it. Ironically, I've only driven SUVs. I just realized I've only driven SUVs just for that purpose, because sometimes I do like to, don't tell the police this, but I do like to sometimes, cut around the sidewalk and go on the grass if I'm trying to get out of traffic. But that has been the essence of my career, quite honestly, metaphorically and literally. So I, come from a family of healthcare providers, and I decided to be the black sheep of the family and not follow down that path. Instead I became the family shame by becoming an attorney. And ironically, even though I'm an attorney, I decided to go into an area of the law that is a social determinant of health. Employment law. Your employment impacts everything. David, if you are unemployed, your access to healthcare, your access to health insurance, your access to healthcare benefits increasingly diminishes the moment that you're no longer employed. And so I spent, a number of years after, attending law school, helping people to gain, helping people in their workplaces who were encountering workplace challenges, whether it was they were encountering discrimination or harassment or retaliation. I was that person who was helping them. I was that person who, if you needed that reasonable accommodation in the workplace because you had a disability, I was that person who was there advocating for you. But then a strange thing happened, David, in where, while working for an agency that didn't have clients, but we represented the residents of the city of New York. And we often would say we represent truth and justice. I noticed that a lot of the people I was working with didn't experience or didn't feel that there was a lot of truth and justice in our system. So you have employment laws that are very, distinct in terms of what really creates an actionable claim. And so if I'm claiming that, I'm gay and I'm not, getting equal opportunities in my workplace because I'm gay. However, I'm not able to provide any examples or any evidence such, and I'm really just showing that my boss treats me the same way he treats everyone else. Crummy. That this is just a person who doesn't know how to manage people. This is someone who doesn't know how to develop people. This is someone who doesn't know how to mentor or sponsor people. My claim now goes down the drain because I'm not necessarily being treated differently because of my LGBTQ plus status. Instead, I'm just being subjected to really poor management. And that's not something you can litigate. That's not unlawful. And so I found that over and over again, many of the people who were trying to file complaints, I was constantly saying the words, this is just not jurisdictional. I can't, move forward with filing this complaint because, we're not able to, we're not able to complete the sentence of, I'm being treated this way because of my protected status, whether it was age, gender, race, national origin, religion. if you can't, add one of those protected statuses, don't have a claim. So then I decided, I'd actually like to find a way to educate people more about our employment laws and really helping people to understand their rights and responsibilities. And, David, I'm a really big believer in people not just simply going to work and going home, but really creating that external visibility and learning more about your craft by way of attending professional association meetings. And one of the biggest ones for attorneys, it's the American Bar Association. And, little secret, many of these associations, to make sure that they are competing with other associations to really draw people into, wonderful locations, is that they'll have their meetings in places like, Florida at a beach or Panama, by the pool, whatever it looks like in terms of, finding a very unique and very beautiful location. And so here I was just, sitting on a beach in Florida, and I struck up a conversation with a professor who had exactly what I was looking for. So he pulled me into, conducting consent decree order trainings. Consent decree order trainings in the United States are trainings that are engaged in because there has been a lawsuit. And in order to settle a federal lawsuit of discrimination, harassment, or any of our EEO laws, in order for a federal judge to sign off on that settlement, you have to provide training to your workforce. And that is training that is non-negotiable. You must provide this training. And so it's probably one of the best environments to conduct training in, because you can't just say, we don't have any money for it. No, you got to go forward and conduct this training. And so there was a company you might have heard, a little company named Fox News that had, a sexual harassment lawsuit. And I was a part of that team that went and conducted the consent decree order trainings. And I often joked that Bill O'Reilly, who was one of the personalities at Fox News at the time, who was the result of, or I should say, the cause of the sexual harassment lawsuit, I often used to say that he paid my mortgage for a few years. And so David, it was just a really wild ride, just on a daily basis, being able to really dig in with a degree that was so fungible. My law degree was not just a degree that got me into courtrooms, but it also got me into media outlets and being able to conduct training and really helping people to understand more about their rights and responsibilities.
Now, it'd be quite easy for me to make a sweeping statement now about bad management should be against the law and we're all against it and all this. But it's one of those things, isn't it, where I can sort of see both sides of this. Thank you as well for a concise but quite wide story there of your career. I think you've clearly rehearsed that and done it a few times. It's very good. But it has given me with lots of stuff to pick up on, and I don't know where to start now. But anyway, so we'll go with the bad management thing, because I think that's kind of relevant to what we're going to talk about today anyway. And then the link between workplace and health as well, I think, is really important. And also the employment law aspects. Now, obviously, there's differences in the US compared to the UK and other parts of Europe now as well, because we're not all the same anymore. Let's not talk about politics.
Nonpartisan.
Yeah. I think there's the common theme for me there is the knowledge or the skill sets of managers, of leaders. There's things that they, I think, as a rule, on average, sweeping generalizations, don't know enough about, don't pay enough attention to. I think understanding employment law in the market where they're working is a key one. And there's too many managers out there who just don't see it as part of their job, don't bother to know even the basics. And then that's probably a big part of why so many of them overstep or do the wrong things, because they just never bother to learn what the right things are. I think the same thing is true, or they fob it off on HR. That's the other one that really annoys me. The same is true with health in the workplace. I think, again, like managers, leaders don't necessarily see it as part of their role, their responsibility. And to a point, I sort of agree with that, because everyone's health is their own responsibility, right? It's an individual, personal thing. But at the same time, if you as a manager or leader are creating an environment that is harmful to the people who work there, that's not right either. So there's a bit of both in that one, I think. Yeah, and then just general bad management, bad leadership. Again, that's not my job. That's not my responsibility. I won't bother to learn about it. It's not my problem. And ultimately, there's no punishment for it anyway, because what are you going to do? You're probably not going to sack me unless I've done something really bad, because it's more expensive for the company to do that, isn't it, usually? So, Yeah, there's a lot of issues all tied up in that story there. So yeah, where shall we start?
You've also dropped a number of nuggets that, I definitely want to pierce in where when we think about what is a manager's responsibility. Sure, there's the responsibility that's on paper in terms of your position description, but then there's the beyond the brochure experience of what management really could and should be. Quite honestly, when you correlate the departure of people, attrition, and customers, there is, a direct correlation that when you're losing your best people, you're also losing customers. I recently had a conversation, this is more anecdotal, but I was just talking to a colleague who was working with this company for a number of years. She was the client, she was the customer, and I was asking her for a reference to this company. I said, would you recommend them? And she said no. Because lately, every time I try to reach out to them, I'm dealing with a new person. I'm dealing with the person who doesn't understand my account. I'm dealing with someone who I have to re-educate. She said, find some place that's a little bit more stable. As human beings, we look for expectation and stability. That oftentimes is something that human beings resonate with, because if I know what to expect, I actually then know how to engage with you. But if every time I walk into the workplace, it's a whole different environment, and as a customer, if every time I walk into your business, it's a whole different dynamic, I'm most likely not going to truly feel invested. And so really good managers I have found are the ones who do say, this is my responsibility, because losing customers is a part of my, remit, and also keeping good employees should also be a part of your remit. When I wrote my book, Exclusion, Strategies for Improving Diversity in Recruitment, Retention, and Promotion, it was very interesting to find that the managers who really did find that there was an importance when it came to, one of the top 10 indicators of a broken workplace culture is informal mentoring and the lack of it. The managers who saw that they had a responsibility to provide that informal mentoring to their people created something very magnetic, and it's called loyalty. They have people that, I'm not saying this person's going to stay with you until retirement. However, when people feel as though they've been invested in, they never forget that boss. They never forget that manager, that leader who went, went beyond, once again, what's in the four corners of their position description and decided to really invest in their growth and development and their capability.
Absolutely. I think there's, again, there's a lot to pick up on in here. But I mean, what we're really talking about is the culture of the workplace, ultimately.
Yeah.
And we've got a few questions on this that we'll get to in a minute. But I think, that mentoring piece, again, it's anecdotal, but I have personal experience, personal stories of that as an employee and as a manager. So, and I've told this story on the podcast before, so I'll gloss over it very quickly. But basically, the first manager I ever had, first senior manager, my first job was a temp job. Even though I was a temp, he still took an interest in my career, my plans, my personal development. He would sit with me whenever he was in the office, which wasn't always because it was a huge multinational company and he worked in Canada most of the time. But when he was in the UK, and he would do that with everyone. I watched him do it. He'd sit down, he'd say, right, what are you working on right now? What are your personal development goals? Where do you see yourself in? All those sort of questions. He didn't have to do that. He was like a global VP and I was the office temp in their smallest office in the world. And it's that sort of thing. And it stands in contrast to managers and bosses that I had later in my career, pretty much all of the others I ever had, in fact. And I've often thought about what was the difference? And I think it was the main difference. It's that the informal mentoring, as you called it, but the interest in your development. Every other boss I ever worked for, I had to chase them for help with my personal development. He was the only one who came to me first. And that's the difference. And I think that's why it's stuck in my memory so well.
And the whole idea that you're even talking about this supervisor versus everyone else, that resonates. That means that this is someone who really did plant the seed of loyalty and interest in you. And so, quite honestly, this person to me has had, greater return on investment for just sitting with you and not micromanaging you and not in any way making you feel as though you were incompetent, but sitting with you to really coach and guide you. I'm a big believer in, the coach approach to leading. The
Uh-huh.
whole idea of you might not necessarily need someone to tell you exactly what to do, how to do it, and the tools to use, but instead someone who's going to spark the questions and the innovation in you by way of having the conversation and really being able to tap into your inner genius.
Yeah, I really like that. The kind of, you start with the questions. Sometimes people will need you to just give them the answers, especially if it was like me, like literally my first office job ever. Like I wouldn't have known where to start. I never would have found the answer on my own. So sometimes I did need the answers. But then later in your career, again, had the opposite experience where I was sort of a decade in the industry and I knew the answers. I just need to be left alone to get on with it. And yet I was still getting the answers pushed at me anyway. But I think that's starting with a question like, what are your needs kind of thing? How can I support you? Those sort of open-ended questions just to see where people are before you then decide which path to take from there. I think that's a really powerful way to start that conversation as a manager. And not everyone does it because of all sorts of reasons, I'm sure, not least being the general stress levels of management these days. But yeah, it makes a difference.
Well, may I tell you my theory on that, like why it doesn't happen?
Please do. Yeah.
So, it's common knowledge that oftentimes people move into leadership not because they're good leaders, but because they're functionally good at their substantive work. So if I'm an engineer, I'm brilliant, or if I'm a mechanical engineer, I'm brilliant at the work of, mechanical engineering. And so it's assumed that I should now be leading people to also do what I do. So the thought is I can reproduce myself by way of managing these people because I am, I'm a subject matter expert in my area of work. And that's a false notion. And we all know that. But I go a little bit deeper than that. And I say it's that, and we also have never really been taught how to be leaders. And then ultimately, a lot of us are carrying our own baggage as leaders or as people, not even as leaders, but as people. So, early in my career, I worked in a very dysfunctional office in where I just saw the cycle of dysfunctionality in where because my boss was treated very, my boss was, denigrated at times by his boss publicly. What do you think he did to me? And what do you think he did to my colleagues? It all landed on us as well. I'll never forget. We were going to a meeting and it was a public meeting and his boss said to him, what? Dog ate your jacket? So for attorneys, your jacket is a part of your uniform. Even if you're not going to court, you always have a jacket with you because you never know if you're going to get that call to go to court. Now, remember, we weren't going to court that day. We were going to a meeting with another agency. However, she never left the office without a jacket, and she expected that of her reports. And she felt that it was a good way of, managing this person by way of, I think in some way she thought she was ribbing him. But because it was done publicly, it became a matter of embarrassment. So this person is now carrying the baggage of, I've been mistreated by my boss. How do you think I'm now going to treat my people? So I think there's a lot of that. There's also self-esteem issues that people haven't really dug into and really haven't, managed. And where once I was invited to speak at a conference in New Zealand. And this was a huge deal for me. I was a new attorney. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what do I have to say that they want to hear? And so I was so flattered. And of course, the trip to New Zealand is not one that you're going to take, in 24 hours. It was something in where I needed some time. And so I went to my supervisor, who had never been asked to speak on any panel for anything. Can you give me the time off in order to participate in this? He took a look at it and he took a look at me. And he said, and even though this was something that really would have inured to the benefit of our office, because I was now speaking in a capacity that would have been able to, create some notoriety for us, would have been able to create more, notice about who we are and the work that we're doing. And it really would have been a great, PR moment for us, a great commercial. He said, I'll give you 1 hour of leave to participate in this, the 1 hour that you're on that panel. And I thought to myself, how are you really encouraging me to go to the networking functions, to go to the, other panels, to meet people and to really feel as though I'm not just there in my own selfish capacity, but I'm also here for this office. But once again, remember, no one had ever invested in him and thought that he had anything worth saying. So therefore, how could he see that in someone else? So I think that's a lot of sometimes what's wrapped up in leadership, that people haven't done their own self-development work.
I think you're right. I think that example piece is key, isn't it? Because even if you have like the will to improve, to be better than the manager you've had, you don't often have a better example. And when you are when you're facing that sink or swim moment, because if you've had a bad manager, there's no way they're going to help you with this. You've got to figure it out on your own. And if that's the only example you've got, I mean, human nature, convenience, time pressure, all these other things stack up. You're just going to do what you've seen, what you've experienced, because you won't know a better way, or you won't have time and capacity to find one.
Exactly. You repeat the cycle. And so I think that's a lot of times in where we get in our own way in terms of leadership. And, I'll admit, I've been very fortunate in where I've had great examples of leaders, great examples of people who were selfless. That person who sat with you when you were a temp, that person was selfless in terms of, seeing that it was an investment of his time to sit with you. But at the same time, he was selfish because he understood, if I sit and I actually, coach and mentor this person is going to be able to contribute so much more back to my organization than what I've poured into him.
100%. Yeah, I think it's the humanity side of it, and it's the business side. Like, the humanity is it's just the right way to do it. Like, it's the right thing to do. It's the right way to treat people, value them, do what you can to support them. That's what leadership really is. But then from a business perspective as well, it's pretty well known, isn't it? I think by this point that healthy people are more productive, happy people are more productive, engaged people who are offered career progression opportunities and personal development, they're all going to be more productive. They're going to be more loyal to your organization. And yes, there's always going to be turnover, because that's the nature of the economy these days. People don't stay in their jobs as long as they used to. But I bet if you do those things right, they'll stay longer than they would have if you didn't. So it makes sense for both of those angles. And this is partly why I get so confused that people still don't understand or don't seem to want to acknowledge that there is a better way of managing. Not everyone. A lot of people get it, but yeah.
I think sometimes also people don't really understand the root causes to how and where improper or poor management shows up. And I'll admit that's the reason why that was the impetus for me writing Exclusion, in where, once again, I saw this schism in where people were interested in being better leaders. People were trying to figure out, how do I keep my good people? But they didn't know how and where their systems were broken. They didn't know how and where their behaviors were showing up. And instead of, attracting people, they were repelling people. And so I collected, a number of testimonials in where people shared raw thoughts and feelings around how these, 10 indicators of a broken workplace culture were showing up for them. And so, as you talk about, what do we know and what don't we know about our own leadership? It was startling to me that, you had instances in where people thought, well, I'm giving good feedback to my people. Here's an example. I'm giving, good feedback. But then you drill down and you ask, well, how does that feedback really translate across your entire workforce? And one thing that I found was that, and this was in a few instances, I found that there was a fear of providing feedback because of not wanting to raise the attention or in any way being mistaken as someone who was discriminating against an individual in the workplace. So when you were talking about, actually going against or going across, cultural differences or demographic differences. So whether we're talking about a man who is, working with a female subordinate, vice versa, when you start talking about those demographics, that's where I found that there was even less rich feedback that people were able to receive from their leaders. And leaders didn't realize that that is something that directly impacts the success and the viability of their team. I'll give one example in where there was a partner from a major law firm who was arguing with me about, yes, I give great feedback to all my people. And we somehow got into the conversation where he was explaining to me that there was an associate that people were not really enjoying to work with. And they were working together one night on a deal. And the partner got really tired and just had very few filters that night. And finally laid into that person and said, this is the reason why people don't like you. And this is the reason why people don't like working with you. And I asked him, would you have given that same feedback to a woman? He said, no. I said, would you have used that same tone with women? He said, absolutely not. And I said, well, understand this. You are not giving the critical feedback that people need in order to succeed in your organization. I understand your concern about being seen as someone who is, aggressive toward women. But I said, there must be a way that you can communicate your thoughts and ideas that really will help someone to right course. Because guess what? That associate who heard that diatribe at 2:00 in the morning, who understood now why people were passing up on working with him, he actually started to straighten up and started to actually shift some of his behaviors. And he was a little bit more cognizant of how he was appearing with other people. That's what feedback can do for people. Don't get me wrong. Not everyone listens to feedback. Not everyone actually will, understand it or even care to implement it. But many of us, and particularly as we start talking about the generations that are entering this workforce, I can't tell you when I was, so in one of my former experiences, I led strategy at Stanford's Federal Research Laboratory. I can't tell you how many of the, millennials on my team and the Gen Zers on my team were always asking for feedback. There was never an assignment where they didn't want to know, how did I do on this? Silence was unacceptable to them. They wanted to know where they did well and where they could have done much better. And I think that's fair.
I've always found there's a huge connection between how much you trust the person you're working for and whether you want to listen to their feedback or even hear it in the first place. I think trust comes up so many times in so many different aspects of leadership, but this is one we've maybe not explored before, I think. And there's also this, so you were talking about leaders not necessarily feeling comfortable giving the same level of feedback or in the same way to different people. I think from the other direction, there's a similar phenomenon there, let's call it, where people are perhaps nervous about asking for feedback from certain managers compared to others. And the aggressive manager is usually I think every workplace has had one of those. Everyone who's had a job has experienced that, I'm sure. And once it's happened once, like I'd love to know, like the guy in your story or the person in your story, did they then go back to that same partner for feedback again in the future or not? Because I feel if that was me, I wouldn't be hearing anything from him again. I wouldn't want to know. Like you come at me like that about feedback in that manner, that's relationship broken for me at that point. Because if you're not treating me with respect, part of me thinks it shouldn't matter, like who that person is, what their identity is, what culture they're from, what their race, gender, sexuality, any of that shouldn't matter. You should deliver it always in the kindest way, not, I'll be aggressive with this one because he's a young dude and he can handle it, but I probably won't do that the same way if it was a woman. No, that's not right, in my opinion. It should be the same kind of approach to everyone, and that's the kindest denominator, not the aggressive one. Does that make sense?
It does. And
maybe I'm being naive, but yeah.
And I just want to make sure that I'm clear in that this partner really was just tired, and he admits that his filters were completely shriveled by the time he had this conversation with this associate. And he actually, I think that he even approached the associate and explained that he should not have approached him that way. I wouldn't say he apologized, but I do think he also tried to make amends.
No, I get that. And we're all human, aren't we? And we all do things at times that we shouldn't or that we regret immediately. But I think once you're in that senior sort of leadership level, it's on you to be self-aware enough to realize, okay, I'm a bit tired, I'm a bit short-tempered, I maybe shouldn't have this conversation right now, for example.
Exactly. However, it's interesting. I must admit, I've been on the end of some very critical feedback. And I'm a big believer that you don't learn from success. you're motivated by success. So, when you have one win, you figure, oh, I can have another win. And that creates the motivation train. However, it is the feedback that sometimes can be critical and can sometimes be brutal that builds up that strength and that grit, that inner ability and capability to persevere. I think back to, so I'll admit when I was, a newer associate, I was, to say the least, I was a little, I was a little disorganized. And so what helped me to become the organized person that I am today, I will always thank a red-faced partner for leaning into me. And I mean, he leaned in hard one day. He was that partner who was not afraid to go across demographic lines to tell me exactly what was on his mind. And he said, you have no respect for deadlines. He says, I give you an assignment and your work is most or always late. And that stuck with me, David. And where until this day, and this is, I want to say now, gosh, I don't want to date myself, but that's going over 20 years ago now. 20 years later, I am still always thinking about deadlines. Matter of fact, when we got on this call this morning, who was waiting for you?
That's a fair point. Yeah. No argument here.
And so that partner drilled into me the importance of timeliness. Now, was he kind as he was giving me this feedback? No. He was brutal. However, I think sometimes we do need to have honest feedback. It's not so much a matter of being, a brute or being disrespectful. I think sometimes we conflate kindness with honesty. And that to me is not really where the distinction for me is. I want honest feedback. How am I really showing up? Because hearing your kind and gentle words are not necessarily helping me. And I'll admit, for people who are historically underrepresented in various professions, it is that honest feedback that is going to help them to, unravel the mysteries of their organization. Every organization has that culture, their norms. Most organizations have, a code of conduct, right? So you have a policy that you can go to understand how and where I should be, engaging in certain policies and practices. But then there's the culture and the norms of the organization that are not written. The culture and the norms that really do eat strategy for breakfast every day. I'm a true believer in what Simon says about that. And I have found that when you are getting that very sometimes coarse, very raw feedback, that is what really helps you to not just understand where the rules of engagement are, but they also help you to understand where you fit within the organization.
So I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think you're right. I don't think we learn as much from success, mostly because human nature is that worked. I don't need to think about it anymore. You're not going to dig into why it worked. Whereas if it didn't work, you need to know why.
Yeah.
Either because you don't want it to happen again, or you just got one of those brains where you have to know why that didn't work. And so you just keep digging until you find it. So I agree on that 100%. So this difference between honesty and kindness, I think they're both important. But I do agree with you. I think people do conflate kindness with dishonesty in kind of protecting people's feelings, that sort of way, because it's kinder to just spare their feelings and not be fully honest with them. So I see where you're coming from. I think you can do both though. So if we take the lateness example, so let's say you're a manager, one of your people has been late 4 times in the last week. The brutal honest approach that I think a lot of managers go wrong with, they call them in the office, they tear them off a strip, right in their face, wagging the finger, totally unacceptable behavior, do it again and you're fired. Do that with kindness. You lead with questions again. It's been noticed you've been late a few days this week. Is there anything going on? Anything we need to talk about? Yeah, actually, it turns out my mum died last week. Okay, that completely changes how I'm dealing with this situation then, doesn't it? But if you didn't ask that question, you've just made the worst week of their life even worse. And that for me is why it's important to have both. You can still be honest with the feedback, but you can also do it in a kind way that doesn't tread all over their humanity and their self-respect. So it's not that I'm saying that's what you're saying. I'm just saying, yeah, it's an important point, I think.
And I think that you raise a really good example. And what you're raising is the empathetic leader, the leader who is thinking not so much about the facts that's right in front of them, but instead looking into the humanity of the person sitting across from them.
Yeah.
And that, once again, can sometimes be difficult for the busy leader, but it takes that intentionality. It takes time. It takes courage, I would even say, to be able to move forward with that empathy. Because once you do receive the response, are you ready to now take actions that would be able to meet your person where they are, to meet your employee where they are?
Yeah.
But I know what I'm saying you're struggling with, though, in terms of the more force feedback. And
yeah, I'll admit as well, I've got
I'm
a bit of a chip on my shoulder about that sort of thing from my own bad experiences with managers. But
and I'm in no way advocating for bullying in the workplace. I mean,
no, of
that's
course.
that's a huge chapter, I'll admit, that I wrote about in the book, in where 21st century bullying isn't a matter of someone throwing a stapler at you anymore. So yeah, David, that used to happen in workplaces in the US, in where if you're working late at night and you haven't, done the correct citations on a document, you might have seen or felt a stapler being hurled at you. I'm not in any way advocating for violence in the workplace. I'm not in any way, advocating for poor behavior. Please, I want to make sure that we're clear on that. But I am advocating for honesty. Bullying in today's workplace, it shows up, by way of sometimes people just leaving you out of the network, people not inviting you to the meetings that you should have been a part of. It's the raised voices. It's the, embarrassing you in front of your coworkers and colleagues. And that in no way creates that sense of loyalty, or that sense of, uh, you know, that sense of, I want to give my best while I'm in this workplace. It doesn't, because even though you may once again learn a lesson from those poor experiences, you're oftentimes trying to figure your way out of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I think loyalty is one of those things where all managers, all leaders say they value it, but not so many of them are any good at actually creating it.
No,
Yeah.
and once again, I think that many of them don't really understand how and where they're going wrong, how and where their behaviors are showing up with their people. I think that, there's the behaviors that we know we should engage in, and then there are the behaviors that we don't even realize that we're engaging in. And so it's really sometimes holding up a mirror to those behaviors and saying, look, this is what is creating a wall between you and this person. This is what's getting in the way of this person being able to trust you. This person being able to feel as though you are someone who has their best interest at heart. And as a result, how much am I really going to give to your organization when I don't feel as though I've been invested in?
Yeah, this is it. It's, going back to the empathetic approach again, this doesn't always work, but I think it's a good place to start, is like, if the roles were reversed and my manager had spoken to me in this way, how would I have responded? I find that's a good place to start. And it doesn't always work, because we're all different and we all react to things differently, don't we? And everyone's got their own context and experiences that maybe they wouldn't react the same way you would, but it's a start.
It is.
Okay, well, we've probably covered off quite a lot of these already, but I'll ask you anyway. So what are some of the other indicators then of a broken culture in the workplace? What should leaders and team members alike be watching out for?
Yes. So I don't know if you've ever had this experience of not being able to recover from a mistake. That is an indicator that when you are not able to give your management the assurance that you made a mistake and you've learned from that mistake and you're ready to move on. There are some leaders who will always believe and always malign you and believe that you're not capable of the bigger and better assignments, all because of that mistake. That's another indicator. And, one of the thoughts David, I'm looking forward to seeing your reaction when I say this, but we often say in the workplace, relationships matter. I worked in hospitality where it was just so evident that nothing got done without relationships. However, those relationships are also killing your organization. even though you think that the relationships are what's helping to create collaboration, they're helping to create camaraderie, they're able to create that sense of um, determinism in the workplace. They're also creating insider and outsider environments in your organization. You have cliques, just like in high school. And, so my mom actually went through the British system for school. And so I'm a little familiar. It was interesting when I was going to college, my mom was asking, when am I taking my O levels? And I thought, what? So, it's thinking back to your high school cafeteria and who sat where and who had relationships with who. When you translate that into the workplace, it's wonderful when you're on the inside. When you're that person who has access, when you're that person who can be forgiven for, the mistakes that you made on an assignment, when your mistakes were seen as, oh, that's something I did when I was a junior engineer, a junior attorney, when I was an intern. However, if you're not on the inside and you are that outsider, you are now seen as that person who is not going to get the informal mentoring. You're that person who might feel isolated. You're that person who might also be subjected to bullying. And so, quite honestly, we need to be mindful and we need to interrogate the relationships that we believe are so important in our organizations. As I mentioned, when I was in hospitality, the relationships that people had with each other, they made it possible for people to call in favors. However, if you were outside of that network of people who were, on the inside, people who had those relationships, it became very difficult to get anything done. I'll never forget, part of my work while I was in hospitality was conducting workplace investigations. So you had a complaint that for instance, you had a complaint that a chef at one of the hotels was, waving his cleaver at his workforce. Or you had a complaint that the general manager of a hotel was sleeping with his employees. You had all these kinds of complaints that had to be investigated. And that was me. I was that person who went in and my goal was to gather the facts and to be able to tell the story and crack open what really occurred so that we could figure out a path forward. We can figure out the remediation. Well, because relationships mattered and because there really was this cult of personality. I'll never forget going into a hotel and where I was sat down by someone who thought they had a relationship with me. And I was told about the person that they were planning to, or the person I was planning to interview. So this person, so the person I was going to interview had a complaint, a valid complaint. It wasn't something that should have been ignored. It wasn't something that should have been in any way forgotten about. However, someone thought that it would be better to tell me more about this person and prep me before I spoke to the complainant. And I sat there thinking, this goes against every norm or every rule of good investigations. I need to walk into the investigation clear, clean, and not having any sort of, thoughts or doubts about this person. And so I often, once again, coach organizations into helping them understand where their relationships and how relationships are impacting their organizations and what do they want to do about them? How do they want to make sure that their relationships are not creating the toxicity that makes it difficult for other people in their organization to breathe the air of quality work assignments, fair opportunity, and promotions?
It is a tough one, isn't it? I mean, particularly like you're drawing the parallel to the high school and the cafeteria kind of moment. But I think a lot of the time what we're talking about here is friendships in the workplace, isn't it? And so how do you as a manager start to try to sway or control who's friends with who and make sure everyone's friends with everyone? I mean, that feels like a losing proposition from the start. Mm-hmm. But I also think you're right. I mean, the phrase, the saying exists for a reason, doesn't it? Relationships do matter. But relationship itself, I think, is a bit of a neutral word, isn't it? Whether they're good or bad. I feel like that is something that leaders can have an impact on. Whether it's just something as simple as like you take the team out for lunch and you make sure everyone is coming and that you rotate around the room as part of that and you make sure you've spoken to everyone and you can, if you're in that sort of leadership or management role, you can try to sort of spark conversations with people who might not otherwise talk. I think there's ways that it's the soft skills approach to solving that problem a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think? What are there other solutions? Have I missed something obvious? I don't know.
So you tapped into one of the greatest defenses to that insider outsider notion. As a leader, you're right. You're not going to be able to create a policy that everyone has to be friends in the workplace. Absolutely not. However, what you can do is that you can lead by example in terms of ensuring that people don't feel that there's a hierarchy in terms of friendships. There might be a hierarchy in terms of seniority in the organization. That's understandable. However, when you're only taking certain people out to lunch, when you're only allowing certain people to get that informal mentoring, when you're only allowing certain people to be able to engage in, joking and making fun of other people in the workplace, that can lead to bullying. When you're that leader who's basically turning your head away when you do see misconduct, you are creating that toxicity. You're allowing those relationships to now get in the way of fair and equitable treatment of your people. And that is something that as a leader, you have a lot of control over. And that is something that you should move forward with. So that's how I coach, and that's how I make recommendations to organizations, that if you are going to be that leader who is going to sit with Sarah on a Friday afternoon and give her advice and give her feedback on her work, you also better be doing it for Paul, Ringo, and John.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's that double standard, isn't it? And it's one of those things as well where people pick up on it a lot more and a lot more quickly than the bosses like to imagine, I think.
People observe.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about you, David, but I've noticed that people will notice very, very tacit things about their organization when they're not on the inside. When people are looking at where they're investing, and I think it's understandable, and I think it's acceptable in that if you're someone who has invested your time and your effort and your energy into this organization, you want to know that there's an opportunity for you waiting down the yellow brick road. You want to know that eventually you could also be a director. You want to know that you can also one day move into the C-suite and be a vice president. And so you're watching to see what's getting the people who are currently in those roles, what's getting those people there. And when you're noticing that you're not given the same kinds of opportunities and access, that then helps to create and fill in the gaps of the stories that you're telling about your leadership and your organization and whether or not this is the place for you.
Yeah. Cliques are funny things as well, I think. Because, sometimes you can be on the outside looking in, other times you can be on the inside looking into another one. I feel like it's one of those things where the grass is always greener. No one's ever really fully happy. But also, the worse your boss is, maybe the better it is to be on the outside.
Well, I mean, when you say the worse your boss is, you mean in terms of being in a relationship with that person?
Yeah, I mean, just like behavior at the workplace, general conduct, management style, all of these things. All these things we've been talking about, really.
So once again, it's a question of where is the nucleus of power in your organization? And oftentimes it is with your leadership. And I have seen people bend their mores. I've seen people, break their ethical codes to be in that nucleus of power, just to be able to get the advancements that they're looking for. Or once again, you're basically, training your competition in many of those circumstances, and where people really are just trying to figure out, where is my next out? Where am I going to?
Yeah. I mean, so your point there about bending their principles, that's exactly what I was hinting at when I said it's better off to be on the outside. I was slightly tongue in cheek, but I think, outside the clique or outside the organization, one or the other, probably both. Yeah. Okay. So time is flying. This is going well. I'm really enjoying this, and we've done one question. So this is good. So whenever I have an HR person on the show, I normally ask them, what's their craziest HR story? So given your expertise, you've probably had to deal with a fair few workplace crises over the years, I would imagine. And then there's usually fallout from it. So, I mean, you've given an example already of like a misconduct investigation. Other ones that a lot of businesses face, like they lose a major customer or they don't get some investment in, that everything was depending on something else goes wrong, COVID happens, all of these kind of things can have huge impacts on the organization, on the culture, on the people. So what's the best advice you can offer to a leader who's trying to rebuild a culture after something like that has happened?
Mm-hmm. So I'm a huge proponent of culture repair. Culture repair is after you've had a workplace crisis, it's understanding what do your people need in order for them to feel psychologically and physically safe. So you ask about one of the, craziest or one of the most zany situations I've been in. It actually was not just zany, but also life-threatening. Uh, on New Year's Eve, I got a phone call that I needed to be a part of a senior management team meeting because we'd almost killed someone. So I worked for a laboratory that was doing maintenance, or, there were some people doing maintenance on our machines, and there was an arc flash. And, this was an arc flash of like thousands of volts of electricity. And this person was severely injured. Luckily, the person didn't die, but you can imagine this person was not returning to work. And now the question was not so much just this person and their family that we're, of course, trying to take care of, but we're also thinking about the other people who witnessed this and the other people. And notice I'm not saying employees. We're talking about the people who are going to hear about this, also wonder, is their workplace safe? And so what we could have done was, you do your your after action reports, you do your investigations, and, you come up with recommendations, and that's it. But interestingly enough, you didn't just have people who were on the, you know, on the side of the business that focused on engineering and maintenance. You also had people on the operations side like myself. It was important to make sure that you had all hands on deck to engage in the culture repair, because you also want to tap into people's understanding and their sense of what is their organization looking like for them right now. You wanted to also tap into their senses of emotional and psychological safety. And you needed people with that expertise to be able to have those conversations. And it also wanted to make sure that it wasn't just simply saying, all right, we are going back to business as usual now that everything has been resolved. There was a sense of this hasn't been resolved for an entire year. And it was a true investment of continuing the conversation, continuing to create an environment of, if you see something, say something, and really not just having those being words on a wall, but instead bringing those sentiments into meetings, bringing those sentiments into conversations, and really making sure that people understood what our values were as an organization. I find that oftentimes that when you are talking about workplace crises that can result in an investigation, like someone has been sexually harassed or someone has been, uh, you know, told denigrating words and denied an opportunity because of one of their protected classes, there's a feeling of, well, just apologize and move on as an organization. But think about how you feel as an employee after that's happened. You wonder to yourself, could this happen again? And when will this happen again? And I often say that when you move past and when you try very quickly to move past for culture repair, you're waiting for the next lawsuit. Or basically, you're just planting the seeds for the next lawsuit. I remember years ago, I was brought in to do some mediation work for a television company, a television show. It was a very popular television show back in the 90s. It was a talk show. And one of the producers, had told their assistant producer, I need you to find me, some people for the segment that we're doing, but make sure that they are articulate and aren't those Black girls that you found for our last segment. Well, the assistant producer was a Black woman. So you can just imagine where this was going, right? Very bruised feelings. And so during the mediation, and the goal of the mediation was to find an alternative dispute resolution mechanism. The goal was to figure out, how do we continue working together and repair what has been torn apart. The producer apologized, and the producer, said, I shouldn't have said that. I understand why my words landed the wrong way. It was like, all right, let's go back to work. And I said, no, we can't, because our assistant producer most likely has something she wants to also say. So in that real moment, it didn't take years to repair it, but just in that moment, you could see how the producer wanted to get back to work, wanted to actually get back to her substantive work, wanted to get past the embarrassment and her reputational damage in that moment. But sometimes as organizations, if we look at that metaphorically, we do need to sit with those moments, and we do need to be intentional and strategic about what the culture needs in that time in order to repair itself. And, the top 10 barriers or the top 10 indicators of a workplace culture or a broken workplace culture are the ways of making sure that if you're looking at how and where these 10 indicators show up, if you're actually being mindful about addressing them, you most likely will never get back to a place of a workplace crisis because you're managing them ongoing and on a daily basis.
Thank you for that. I think, the apology point. I mean, it's nothing as severe as your examples, but I've seen that before as well, where people, right, I've apologized. What else do you want? It's over now. Move on. And let's say, like in the example of discrimination, let's say somebody didn't get a promotion because of that. An apology, I mean, it's worthless, isn't it? It doesn't make up for the fact that they've now missed out on probably tens of thousands of dollars in earnings for the next few years because they didn't get that promotion. And it feels, I get why people think, well, I've apologized, because that's like a social norm, isn't it? I said, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. Can we move on? But it's a bit too convenient, I think, and it overlooks the damage that has potentially been done. And it doesn't really do anything to address that either.
And it makes it very difficult for you to trust
Absolutely.
the leader and the organization that it won't happen again.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same with bullying, isn't it? Like, I've been known to say that culture is the worst behavior that you're allowed to happen in your organization. That's ultimately what it becomes in so many businesses, particularly when people aren't actively working on the culture, which very few do. And I think bullying is another example of that, isn't it? Like, people get a bit too, maybe complacent is the word I'm looking for, particularly like senior leadership, where they're not really seeing it happen probably, or they're the culprits, but they don't see it as a problem. So they don't really want to deal with it. And they think it will just go away on its own. And then lo and behold, you've got this horribly toxic culture where nobody trusts anybody. Nobody trusts the leadership to look after them. And the turnover is very high.
And that's why it's so important to make sure that you are attending to those issues. So with the example of the employee who was severely injured because of a safety mishap that we actually helped to create. We helped to create a culture where yes, people were racing to the bottom and where they weren't feeling safe enough to let us know when there were issues with their PPE, where there were issues with, things that they saw that were unsafe. And so for I wouldn't even say just a year, for the years that followed, we made sure that we weren't just simply, once again, looking at culture as the worst things that you could do. We were also looking at culture as what are the better things that we can do. And so that was the investment of time, effort, and energy that we made into ensuring that our people felt safe, such that when we took a culture climate survey, overwhelmingly, people said that they felt safe in our organization. An organization in where just 9 months prior to, someone almost died because of a safety incident.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's exactly the difference we're talking about, isn't it? It's when you actually do go through that intentional process of working on your culture instead of just letting it happen. I mean, it would be nice if more companies did it without needing like a near-death situation to prompt them into it, but we'll get there one day.
Exactly. And look, I mean, to their credit, there are many organizations that do understand the importance of culture repair, and where they don't just simply try to breeze past and breeze through what the pain point was for the organization. Organizations that I've worked with, and where they do see the need to actually go beyond just the compliance training. And they really do sit with the hard and difficult work of how are we making sure that people can recover from mistakes? How do we make sure that there is parity and that there's equity in how people are getting quality work assignments, and that people aren't struggling with dual identity and feeling as though they can't show up as, who they are in terms of the work that they're doing? How are we making sure that their authentic self can show up in terms of, the contributions that they can make to our organization? And how are we making sure that people aren't isolated, especially if they're the first or the only of a particular demographic group, how are we making sure that this is something that we are going to make a part of our priority in how we're treating people?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And all the more difficult in a remote environment as well.
Yes.
Because we mentioned COVID earlier, so we should mention that as well.
Yes. But once again, it's a matter of like, what are you building into the different systems and structures? And, remote work, it's a similar system and construct of working. It's just a question of how are you going to be intentional about ensuring that your people feel included? Are you sending gift cards to people who show up on the, Zoom meetings to make sure that they can purchase a lunch when they're not able to come into the office to have a meeting with you? How are you making sure that, this is not going to be something that drives a wedge between you and your people, but instead meets them where they are?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So question wise, we're going to forget a whole bunch of them, I think. So we sort of talked around this a bit earlier, but I mean, these kind of the broken, the bad, the toxic cultures. One example that's popped into my head because of the story you've just told is, I won't name them just in case they sue us. They probably won't, but a major aircraft manufacturer who may have had a certain Netflix documentary made about them a few years ago. There was a whole thread running through that about safety culture. And the brutal truth at one point became clear that it was cheaper to just pay off the lawsuits if a bunch of people were killed than it would invest the R&D to avoid the problem so they wouldn't be killed. So profit, perhaps, is a reason why so many of these bad cultures exist, whether it's bad in the sense of unsafe, literally people's lives, or bad in the sense of an uncomfortable work environment where nobody's really happy. That's maybe one reason. What are some of the other reasons do you think that these sorts of cultures are still so widespread, even though we all know it's no fun to work there, nobody really enjoys it? I don't think the leaders of those organizations enjoy that feeling either, but it still seems to be quite common.
So what you're describing in terms of putting profits over people, it's not a long game. When you think about business vitality, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to be the focus of a Netflix documentary that didn't show me in the best light. I think about, what was that show, the Tiger something another, that other documentary that was on Netflix, in where a few years ago, this person and their business became a laughingstock because of how their story was told in the documentary. Similar with this aircraft carrier that you're talking about. Just think about the challenges that they're going to have in terms of recruiting the top aviation people, the top engineers, the top mechanics, the top operations people. I wouldn't be running to go to that organization, would you?
No.
And so that's why I say it's not a long game in where when you stop to think about putting profits over people, because as we said earlier, there is a direct correlation between the people that your organization lose and the customers that you're also losing. And ultimately, as we were talking about earlier, you brought up the whole notion of trust. As a customer and as a flyer, how trusting are you going to be of this company the next time that you're thinking about taking a flight? I mean, there are a number of news articles. There are a number of television night show comedians who were making this situation fodder. It was fodder for their nighttime, comedy shows. Organizations that are thinking long term don't want to be on that side of history. They want to be on the end of history when you're talking about, organizations that have made rapid turnarounds. They're thinking about Uber, companies like Uber, who, yes, had a toxic culture when it came to, women and how they were treated in sexual harassment. And they did an entire, about face and cleaned house when it came to their senior leadership. And also looked at how and where are they repairing their culture where it was broken. They went from broken to better. And so I think that's what organizations really, I think that's really what organizations that are thinking about their long-term legacy and also their stock prices, they're really not just thinking about, hey, I can put this Band-Aid over this issue. I can put a Band-Aid over a broken arm. Instead, they're thinking, let me really do the proper wound treatment. Put this arm in a cast, rest for a few months or weeks, and then come back stronger and better and repaired.
I think you're right. The best ones are thinking that way, definitely. I also think, though, there's this category almost now, isn't there, in the world of companies that are too big to fail, in inverted quotes. And I think those companies don't seem to really care about their reputations as much as they might have 10, 20, 30 years ago. And I don't know if that's a sign of without wishing to veer into it, but the sign of our politics in the world these days, where, again, reputation doesn't seem to matter as much as it used to. Or it's just they've literally got so much money, they just don't care. It doesn't matter. They'll just pay their way out of the problem. Maybe that's what they think. I don't know. Anyway, that's a bit doom and gloom, isn't it? Let's move on.
If I may just step into that for just one moment, I do think that it may be more difficult for some businesses to fail. However, I push back. Well, I wouldn't say I push back, but I push forward with the question around, but are you really surviving as an organization? I think that when you look at some legacy organizations, which I will not mention right now, but when I look at some of them have been acquired by newer and different and by the new kids on the block, it says to me that no organization really is too big to fail. When I think about Lehman Brothers and how they went under, like who would have ever thought? And so I do think that it might take a while for you to fold, but I do think eventually some organizations, if they are that improperly managed, they're not going to survive the way in which they are, currently. They will be acquired. They will be reorganized. They might even be monitored by the government for quite some time.
Yeah, maybe. I have to hope that that's the reality. Yeah. It's too depressing otherwise. Yeah. Right. Okay, let's move on to a happier question. So earlier on, I shared a story, which, if I'm being really honest, was my best memory of being led. I'd love to know what your best memory is of a leader that you followed.
I had a boss who understood the importance of family, and he understood the importance of your health. And there was never a time in where you felt as though you had to choose work or your health. If you weren't feeling well, he'd say, stay home. He'd say, take care of yourself. When I had my son, he did not rush me back into the office. He said, and, I'm sure on some level, as the employment lawyer, I thought, I'm not sure if he can really say this to me, but he said, go home and have your baby. He said, we'll see you when you get back. And so I think that the employer who sees that you are a whole person and not just the worker bee, that's someone who actually, in my opinion, honors their people.
I love that. And I don't know about you, but that's always the way I've tried to be when I was leading people as well. Like, especially with health stuff. I will never really understand people who insist that everyone works even if they're sick. Like, especially in a physical office. Yeah, bring your germs to work. We'll all have them. That'll be great. Like, that's not going to harm productivity at all. It's just, it makes no sense to me on any level.
Exactly. And to be honest, we were in a very high stakes area. We were in law enforcement. So we were in a profession of life or death. However, he still found the space in the room to understand that if he's properly created an organization where there are backfills, you can take time to be the human being you need to be because there's someone else who can pick up the slack for you. And if there was no one else, he would do it.
Yeah, that is great leadership, isn't it? And I wonder if that's why it was the way it was, because it was such a high stakes environment. So there was less room for things to go wrong. So you have to kind of build that in. And I wonder if you didn't have the complacency about that sort of thing that the average office or workplace might have.
Well, let's just say there were other leaders in the organization that did not lead that way.
Okay. Enough said. Yeah. Oh, awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that story. And I've only got one question left. Well, I've got loads, but I'm going to skip to the last question because I know you have things to get to. So this is my favorite question. It's leadership heroes.
Leadership Heroes.
If you had to pick one person, but it can be literally anyone you could think of, so they could be alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious, but it's got to be someone who, in your opinion, would perfectly embody leadership. So which person is that going to be for you and why?
I sit in Maryland, the home of Harriet Tubman, and I'm able to physically look outside my window right now and look at the land that she traversed. And I can't even tell you, I have a hard enough time walking to the stop sign, much less walking miles, running miles with other people with me, with babies in tow, all, in the name of freedom. And so she truly embodies strength, courage, tenacity, and selflessness when it comes to leadership.
It's a good answer. I'm afraid someone's chosen her before, though, so no bonus points. Bad luck.
But did they sit in Maryland?
They did not. No, that's true. That is true. Yeah, you've got proximity on your side.
But yeah, I mean, for me, that's a genuine answer. Bonus points or not. It's been very important that my family support the Harriet Tubman Museum. It's very important that I drive my young son past the shop where she was, struck with that metal object that, eventually led to her seizures. And it's important that he sees physically, what did the topography look like for someone who wasn't even as big as I was, someone who was small in stature, to be able to say, I'm going to get out of here and to actually do it.
Perfect example, I think. I mean, we did say leadership heroes, didn't we? So thank you very much for sharing that. Well, Natalie, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and it's always a good sign that we barely cover any questions, I think, when we get to the end. But yeah, I mean, if you ever want to do the rest of the questions, you're welcome back anytime. One final thing I will ask you, if anyone in the audience would like to know more about you or the work that you do, what's the best place for them to go to learn more?
Thank you, David. It's been a pleasure being in conversation with you, and I'm in the process of writing my next book, Culture Repair. Yes. So I would love to be able to actually chat with you about that one. If anyone is interested in the interim, however, in engaging with me, you can reach out to me at natalieholderspeaks.com. So it's my first and last name, speaks.com.
Excellent. Well, I will pop that link in the show notes as well, so everyone can find that easily. It's literally right there. Lovely. Well, Natalie, have a great rest of your day. Thank you again so much for being with us. And talk soon, I hope.
Oh, and thank you for such a great conversation. You brought back so many memories.
Yeah, likewise, actually, yeah. Natalie, thank you again so much for your time today. I learned quite a bit from that, and I think we had a bit of fun as well. I certainly did. I'm sure the listener and the viewer did as well. Speaking of whom, if you would like to know more about Natalie, do check those show notes, find the link to her website, perhaps reach out to her on the socials as well. I know she would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for being with us today. I hope you'll join us again next week when I'll be talking with a former pastor and a former FBI agent. Yes, it is the same person. His name is Eric Robinson. We will hear about the book that he's written, about his journey from preacher to breacher. Pretty clever marketing there as well. All of the experiences that he had in those two careers and his whole career, what it taught him about people, leadership, diversity, and much more besides. Really interesting conversation there from a perspective we've not had on the show before, and certainly a pretty unique job and career history too. So don't miss that. It will be here next week. In the meantime, I will see you again very soon. No, wait, you'll see me again very soon. And until that next episode, as always, remember, be a leader, not a boss.